All right, so get this. Today we're going deep, really deep into the world of consciousness.
Ooh, sounds intense.
It is. And
Yeah.
guess what? It all comes down to like how the language we use shapes the way we actually experience consciousness.
Whoa, hold on. Really?
Yeah, seriously. We're using this 1988 book by Viktor Petrenko. It's called Psychosemantics of Consciousness.
Okay, Psychosemantics of Consciousness. Catchy.
Right. It's pretty dense. It's, originally in Russian, so there's that, but it's honestly mind-blowing.
All right, you got me hooked. Lay it on me.
So the big idea here is that like we always think of language as just this tool for communication, right?
Yeah, for sure. How else would we talk to each other?
But Petrenko says, no, 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 it's way more than that. He says language is like the actual foundation of our conscious experience.
Whoa, slow down. Foundation. What do you mean by that?
So think of it this way. It's like the scaffolding that gives like structure to our thoughts, our perceptions, everything.
Okay, scaffolding, I kind of get it, but give me an example, something concrete.
All right, try this. Try explaining the concept of freedom without using any words at all.
Freedom, without words. That's,
Right. It's almost impossible.
yeah, I guess you're right. It's like, how do you even grasp the idea of freedom without the word itself?
Exactly. So language, those words, they provide the framework for us to even get our heads around these like abstract concepts.
So it's not just communication, it's like shaping how we understand things.
Totally. And one of the ways that psychosemantics, this whole field explores this connection is through something called semantic spaces.
Semantic spaces. Okay, now you're just making up words.
Uh-huh. No, I promise it's a real thing. Think of them like maps.
Maps. I love maps.
Me too. But these are maps of how our minds organize meanings.
Okay, now that's interesting. So, like, how do they make these maps? Do they just ask people what things mean?
Well, there are some fancy techniques like one's called Osgood's semantic differential.
Osgood's semantic differential.
Okay.
You lost me again.
It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. They basically ask people to rate words, on scales, like with opposite words, like good, bad, strong, weak, that kind of thing.
Oh, I see. So, like, is happy good or bad?
Exactly. And then they use all this data to plot words in a multidimensional space, showing how close or far apart concepts are in our minds.
So you're saying, like, happy and joyful might be closer together on this map than, say, happy and sad.
Bingo. It's like a visual representation of how our minds categorize and connect different ideas.
That's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. Like, literally a map of how we think.
Right. And here's where things get even more wild. Petrenko, the author, he found that these semantic spaces, those maps, they're not universal.
Wait, what? You mean, like, my map is different from yours?
Potentially, yeah. They can vary between cultures.
So even something as simple as, like, happy could mean something different depending on where you're from.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. The way we express happiness, the things we associate with it, it can be so different across cultures.
That's true. Okay, give me an example from the book.
Great. So Petrenko, he found some pretty fascinating differences when he compared the semantic spaces of Russians and Azerbaijanis.
Okay, Russians and Azerbaijanis. What did he find?
For example, for Russians, the idea of helping a friend was clustered closer to concepts like duty and obligation. But for Azerbaijanis, it was more about friendship and enjoyment.
Whoa, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
So even something as simple as helping a friend can be seen through totally different lenses.
Exactly. It's a big reminder that culture really shapes how we see the world, even at a really basic level of meaning.
Makes you wonder, right? What other everyday things are we interpreting totally differently because of our cultures?
Right. It's like, whoa, there's a whole world of meaning out there I might be missing.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We're just scratching the surface here.
I know. It's getting me all fired up to keep digging into this. And you know what? It gets even more interesting. These semantic spaces, those maps, they can also show like hidden structures in how we think.
Hidden structures. What are you talking about?
Okay, so like by looking at these maps, researchers can actually see things like unconscious biases, cultural assumptions, even like personality differences.
Seriously, it's like holding up a mirror to our minds.
Right, like seeing things we might not even realize are there.
Okay, that's a little creepy, but also cool. So, like, how does that work? What kind of things can they see?
Well, the book talks about how these semantic spaces can be used to analyze stereotypes, how we perceive different social groups.
Oh, yes, stereotypes. Everyone has them, right?
Right. But by mapping how people perceive these groups, researchers can actually see those underlying prejudices that shape our judgments.
So it's like exposing the roots of prejudice.
Exactly. And that's just one example. There's so much more to uncover here. It's like the more we explore these semantic spaces, the more we learn about ourselves and how we make sense of the world.
Okay, I'm in. Where do we go from here?
Well, next time, let's get practical. Let's see how these ideas, all this mind-bending stuff actually plays out in the real world.
All right, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Welcome back. We're still swimming in this sea of psychosemantics, and my brain is like doing somersaults over this idea that language isn't just, neutral, it's actually shaping the reality we live in.
It's a pretty wild thought, right? Like
Yeah.
those words we throw around every day, they have so much more power than we realize.
That's what's been bugging me. If language is so powerful, then how do we even untangle all those meanings behind the words? It seems so subjective, Everyone has their own interpretation.
Yeah, meaning is definitely slippery, but that's kind of what makes this whole thing so fascinating. Psychosemantics, it dives right into that subjective world, recognizing that meanings aren't fixed. They're constantly being shaped and reshaped within our minds.
So it's like the dictionary definition of a word is just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. The dictionary gives you the, what do they call it? The denotative meaning, the literal definition. But the really interesting stuff to this stuff psychosemantics digs into is the connotative meaning, all those emotional and cultural layers a word carries.
Okay, I need a visual here. Give me an example.
All right, picture this. The word freedom. For some people, it might bring to mind wide open spaces, a feeling of liberation, maybe even like a bald eagle soaring, all that patriotic stuff.
Oh, yeah, I get that. But for others,
For others, it might be totally different. They might feel a sense of responsibility, the weight of choices, maybe even anxiety about the unknown.
whoa, that's true. I never thought about it like that. The same word, but completely different vibes.
And that's what psychosemantics is all about, unpacking those personal and cultural associations, figuring out how those meanings are formed, how they change depending on who you are and where you're from, and ultimately, how they shape our thoughts and actions in the world.
Okay, so if it's all so personal, how do researchers even study this stuff? Do they, just ask people what words mean to them?
It's a bit more complicated than that. Remember those semantic spaces we were talking about? Those maps of how our minds organize concepts?
Oh, yeah, the maps, like how happy might be close to joyful, but far away from melancholy.
Exactly. Those maps are a key tool for understanding meaning. By looking at them, researchers can start to see the hidden connections between words, how we group things together, and that reveals a lot about our worldview.
So it's not just about individual words anymore, but the whole web of meanings that connects them.
You got it. Psychosemantics is all about that web, how it's formed, how it changes, how it shapes our understanding of the world. It's seeing language as this living, breathing thing, not just a bunch of static definitions.
This is making my brain hurt in a good way. It's like we're not just studying language, but the very essence of human thought.
And that's why it's so important for understanding cultural differences. Remember Petrenko's study with the Russians and Azerbaijanis? How they had different semantic spaces for certain concepts.
Oh, yeah, their mental maps were totally different.
Exactly. And those differences show how much culture shapes our understanding of the world, down to the most basic level of meaning. It's not just about different languages, it's about different ways of thinking, different lenses through which we see reality.
So miscommunication between cultures, it might not just be about the words themselves, but about deeper differences in, how we construct meaning in the first place.
Exactly. It's like we're speaking different dialects of meaning, even if we're using the same words.
Whoa, mind blown again. Makes you realize how much we take for granted about our own way of seeing things.
And it's not just about comparing cultures either. Psychosemantics can also be used to analyze the semantic spaces of specific groups of people to understand their shared worldview.
Oh, different professions, how doctors and lawyers might have their own, jargon and ways of thinking.
Right. Or different age groups, how teenagers might see the world totally differently from, say, their grandparents. Psychosemantics gives us a way to peek into those group-specific meanings, to see how they shape their identity and behavior.
So it's like mapping the shared mind of a group.
In a way, yeah. It helps us understand the cultural and social forces that shape how a group sees the world, how they talk to each other, how they make decisions.
Fascinating. But how do researchers actually do this, gather the data to create these maps?
Well, they've got a few tricks up their sleeves. One common approach is to use, questionnaires or surveys, asking people to rate how similar certain words or ideas are. Another way is to analyze tons of text, like speeches, articles, even social media posts, to see how language is used within a particular group.
So it's like a mix of number crunching and like close reading of actual language.
Exactly. And by using both approaches, psychosemantics can get a really detailed picture of how meaning is built and shared within groups.
This is making me think about all the different groups I belong to and how, like, my own understanding of the world is influenced by those shared experiences.
And that's one of the coolest things about psychosemantics.
Mm.
It encourages us to be more aware of our own biases and assumptions and to, like, try to see the world through different lenses.
I can definitely see how this could be a powerful tool for, like, promoting empathy and understanding, especially in a world that feels so divided right now.
Absolutely. By understanding how different groups create meaning, we can start to find common ground and bridge those divides.
Now, that's a truly awesome application of psychosemantics, using the power of language to connect, not divide.
It's definitely a field with huge potential for positive change. It gives us the tools and perspectives to navigate all this complexity of human communication and culture in a more, like, informed and compassionate way.
This deep dive is seriously making me rethink everything I thought I knew about language and, just how powerful it is in shaping our reality, both individually and as a society.
It's a big realization, for sure. But recognizing that power is the first step toward using language more consciously and responsibly in our own lives and in the world.
This journey into psychosemantics has been amazing. It feels like I've gained a whole new set of tools for understanding myself and the people around me.
It's been great exploring these ideas with you. But hold on tight, because we're not done yet. Next time, we're tackling a topic that's, well, a little bit uncomfortable, but incredibly important. Stereotypes.
Ooh, this is getting good. Stereotypes, those sneaky little biases that we all have lurking in our minds. I'm ready to shine a light on those bad boys.
We're going to see how those maps of meaning we've been talking about can actually be used to expose the hidden prejudices that shape how we see different social groups. It's going to be a thought-provoking one, so make sure to join us for the final part of our deep dive into the world of psychosemantics.
Okay, so stereotypes. I gotta admit, this is like kind of scary territory, but also super important.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that can make people uncomfortable, but avoiding it doesn't make the problem go away. And psychosemantics, it actually gives us some really cool tools for understanding how stereotypes work, like at a deeper level.
That's what I'm curious about. Like, how do those semantic spaces, those maps of meaning we've been talking about, play into stereotypes?
Well, think of stereotypes as like simplified maps in our heads about certain groups, right?
Hmm.
But they're oversimplified, often inaccurate. And they're based on like limited information, things we've heard, stuff we've seen in the media, and a lot of times unconscious biases that we've picked up along the way.
So it's like taking a whole complex group of people and like flattening them into a single category based on just a few like surface level traits.
Exactly. And those assumptions, those like quick judgments, they often come from how these groups were portrayed in language, in movies, in everyday conversations. Like think about the words that pop into your head when you hear, say, politician or teenager.
Oh man, yeah. I'm already cringing at some of the not so nice stereotypes that come to mind.
And that's exactly the point. Those automatic associations, those knee-jerk reactions, especially when they're negative, they're a sign that stereotypes are at work. And the scary thing is, they can actually influence how we treat people, how we behave toward them, leading to, prejudice and even discrimination.
It's like this vicious cycle. Biased thinking leads to biased language, which then reinforces the stereotypes, and round we go. It can feel really hard to break free.
It can be tough. But that's where psychosemantics comes in. By, like, shining a light on these hidden structures of meaning, it gives us a chance to actually challenge and dismantle those harmful stereotypes.
Okay, I'm all for that. How do we actually use psychosemantics to do that? Like, practically speaking, how can we break the cycle?
Well, one powerful approach is to analyze how different groups are represented in, like media and everyday language. Researchers can, for instance, look at news articles, movie scripts, even social media posts to see how certain groups are being portrayed, what kind of language is used to describe them.
So it's about uncovering those subtle patterns in language that might reinforce stereotypes, even when they're not, like, explicitly stated.
You got it. And by bringing those patterns to light, we can start to challenge those narratives and push for more balanced and accurate representations.
Yeah.
It's recognizing that language, it's never neutral. It always carries values, beliefs,
Yeah.
and yeah, even power dynamics that can unfortunately perpetuate inequality.
That makes so much sense. It's like if we want to change the stereotypes themselves, we got to start by deconstructing the language that supports them.
And this is where Petrenko's work gets really fascinating. Remember how he did that study comparing how Russians and Azerbaijanis perceive certain social roles? He found some pretty big differences in their semantic spaces, suggesting that even our ideas about what it means to be a good neighbor or a responsible citizen, those are shaped by our cultural background.
So those differences in meaning, those different interpretations, they could lead to misunderstandings, even conflict between groups.
Absolutely. And this is where psychosemantics has so much potential for building bridges. By recognizing that different cultures might have different interpretations of, like, even the simplest concepts, we can start to have more empathy and understanding in our interactions with each other.
This is making me think about all the times I've probably made assumptions about people based on stereotypes without even realizing it. It's kind of humbling, to be honest.
We all do it.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible not to, right? Stereotypes are so ingrained in our culture in the way we talk that we absorb them unconsciously. But the good news is, once we become aware of them, we can start to challenge them.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What can we do, like in our daily lives, to be more mindful of those biases and, you know, use language in a way that's more inclusive and less, well, stereotypical?
Here's the thing. First, pay attention to the language you use, both in your own head and when you're talking to others. Like, challenge yourself to use language that's more inclusive, more accurate, especially when talking about different groups.
So even those like little jokes or offhand comments we make, those can actually perpetuate harmful stereotypes.
Totally, even if we don't mean them in a bad way. Second, actively seek out diverse perspectives and experiences. Get out of your comfort zone, read books by authors from different backgrounds, have conversations with people who see the world differently than you do.
It's all about expanding our understanding of the world, right? Breaking out of those echo chambers.
Exactly. And last but not least, be willing to, like, really look at your own biases. We all have them. It's part of being human. But by acknowledging them, we can start to figure out where they came from and how they might be influencing our thoughts and actions.
Wow. This has been like a roller coaster of a conversation. It's made me realize just how powerful language is, not just in shaping our own thoughts, but in like literally shaping the social world we live in.
It's been awesome exploring this with you, and I really hope our listeners are leaving this deep dive with, like, a whole new appreciation for the power of language, for better or worse.
This whole journey into psychosemantics has been incredible. It's like mind-blowing to think that this one concept, the connection between language and consciousness, can have such a huge impact on, well, everything.
It all comes back to that idea that language isn't just a tool for communication. It's the very fabric of how we think, how we see the world, how we create meaning together.
And that's a pretty powerful realization, because if we can understand that power, we can use it to create a world that's more just, more equitable, more understanding.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a real pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Keep those brains buzzing, keep exploring these ideas, and keep using your words to make a positive difference in the world.